Before I begin, I'd like to clarify what my intentions are with this video. I have great respect for Neville Goddard and his teachings. This video is not intended to suggest otherwise, nor does this message even apply to many believers of Goddard's work. This video is meant for the people that are using Goddard's teachings to manifest a romantic relationship with a specific person, and to be even more precise, for the people whose subject of their affection has become the source of their own torment. While some that attempt to manifest a specific person do so largely in a state of indifference and would stop immediately once their attempt causes them more harm than good, for others, their desire for reciprocated love has wholly consumed them, for which its pursuit causes them to lose years of their lives. I wish to shine a light on a less orthodox perspective on this collective suffering. The Native Americans used the word Wetiko to describe a collective mind virus whose goal is to cause the victim as much self-inflicted emotional distress as possible. This virus can infect the individual just as much as it could infiltrate large communities that ascribe to any one belief system. It is not just parts of Goddard's teachings that have been corrupted. A very similar narrative is being run in the Twin Flame communities, for example, and quite possibly many others. As it turns out, no attempts of misdirection can lead us astray better than the way we contort ourselves over love. I aim to open a discussion on the way that I feel many in this specific person community, including myself at one point, have fallen prey to this parasitic consciousness. I will discuss the subtle ways in which this mind virus operates, how it has infiltrated Goddard's message, and solutions to overcoming Wetiko. And lastly, if you would prefer to read the written version of this recording, you may refer to my blog post in the description. Now, let's begin. Part 1. The Dangers of the Specific Person Movement. It has become increasingly clear that the law of assumption, referring to the teachings of Neville Goddard, has dominated New Age circles in recent years. In its unpolluted form, I believe Goddard's teachings are an effective way to shape your reality. I have experienced personal testimony of the law, and I am convinced there is some merit to his teachings that should be explored. However, it does not take long to notice something seriously amiss within Neville-centric communities. It is something that I feel people are too afraid to speak out about or even acknowledge. An offshoot of Goddard's assertion that everyone is you pushed out is that you can influence a specific person or SP to fall in love with you. Many declare that such an outcome is not only possible but guaranteed so long as the correct procedures are followed. This idea precedes most of Goddard's work and is the primary cause for his recent explosion in popularity. And while I do not deny that it may be possible for such a manifestation to be realized in certain instances, I cannot ignore what I have the eyes to see. You are significantly more likely to encounter people in states of perpetual heartache talking about how they've spent X amount of time manifesting the love of a specific person to no avail than you will find a genuine success story. Unfortunately, a large part of this community has been encouraged to pursue a fruitless endeavor with no respect for an individual's plausible life path, an endeavor that is capable of stealing years from their lives. But how did this happen? And more importantly, how did we allow this to happen? I feel that to downplay the existence of evil was a mistake on Goddard's part. While he was correct that the notion of evil can stem from the inner workings of the subconscious, he fails to note that its very existence is insidious. This evil inside of us will cling to any harmful collective narrative that has the potential to cause us suffering. In fact, any idea that grows big enough has the potential to be weaponized against us. And while Goddard did warn us to be aware of external charlatans, he did not provide the inner safeguards that would better immunize his teachings from this parasitic consciousness. Part 1.1 What is Wetiko? To better understand this collective madness, I will be exploring the notion of Wetiko, a Native American belief that Paul Levy further contextualized in his book, Dispelling Wetiko. Wetiko is a collective mind virus that, quote, covertly operates through the unconscious blind spots in the human psyche, rendering people oblivious to their own madness and compelling them to act against their own best interests, end quote. Almost all religions and cultures have their own descriptions of Wetiko. Similitudes include demons, jinn, archons, and Mara. And while these terms all functionally describe the same phenomenon, Wetiko differs in that it is not a tangible entity. It is both real and unreal, and its paradoxical nature intentionally makes itself difficult to comprehend. Unlike a demon, which is considered an objective being existing in a different realm, the Wetiko virus exists only within the unconscious aspects of our own psyche. The most astute observer of this phenomenon was Carl Jung, who expressed Wetiko as the fragmented aspects of ourselves that have become repressed in the unconscious mind. The nature of Wetiko manifests itself in both the individual and collective consciousness. To demonstrate how Wetiko can enslave the masses, Levy perceptively uses the example of an oil company's desire to ravage the Amazon rainforest. The oil oligarchs grow richer by destroying the very habitat that keeps them alive. Quote, every man has inside himself a parasitic being who is acting not at all to his advantage, end quote. While what I have just said may sound like fear-mongering, I believe this awareness of Wetiko can become the ultimate source of an individual's liberation. Wetiko is not an objectively evil parasite. Its purpose is to hijack our repressed identities, using them as a vehicle to create as much upheaval in our lives as necessary until these identities are forced to be acknowledged by the conscious mind. Towards the end of the recording, I have provided a list of solutions that I hope can inspire the path to sovereignty. This explanation of Wetiko may not make much sense at first, but this recording intends to flesh out these ideas intuitively for those already familiar with the specific person narrative. If you feel compelled to continue listening, then I hope this recording proves to be insightful, or at the very least, encourages your consideration of different ideas with an open mind. If not, that is more than okay. Sometimes we need to have the experience before we can rewrite our judgments. Such is a holy procedure, one that is worth more than mere words on an audio recording. Part 2. Soul-centered desires versus lower desires. One sentiment used to justify the parasitic yearning for a specific person is the idea that all desires are given to you by God and therefore are all promises of the wish fulfilled. And while it may be true that in an objective sense all desires are given to you by God, I believe that to assume all desires are given for the sole intent to be made manifest is a grave mistake. Wetiko knows us better than we know ourselves, and can distort what we believe we desire. When our desires are driven by Wetiko, or our lower awareness, we can know they merely stem from the wishes of our repressed identities, not from the genuine desires of our conscious self. To act on such desires would thus be the cause of great suffering. But it is this suffering that acts as a conduit of God, allowing us to finally see the previously hidden aspects of our psyche and unresolved traumas. This differs from the soul-centered desires that we may have. Such desires arise from our higher awareness and are given to be made manifest for our greater good. The desires from our lower versus higher awareness operate through entirely different means. Thus, this discrepancy may explain why some God-given desires for specific people can never manifest, because they were not given to be manifested. Wetiko bends our perceived identity. It can make us believe that we want somebody, even if that person is the source of our destruction. For instance, consider the psychology behind a codependent, abusive relationship. Most victims in these relationships either know they are being abused or consciously blind themselves to the abuse. And yet, for most of these people, their greatest desire is still to continue the relationship with their abuser. As Levy puts it, quote, "People so afflicted, strangely enough, cling to the very thing that is torturing and destroying them." End quote. To elaborate further, many people in abusive relationships have grown up in abusive households. Maybe the love from their parents was restricted or wasn't shown at all. As a result, a false identity of being unlovable begins to take hold of their consciousness. This identity acts as a container for their hurt, which oftentimes is too painful for them to fully comprehend. Thus, it gets buried deep inside the unconscious part of their psyche. But simply burying this pain will not remove it. Instead, it begins to fester within the unconscious mind, where this identity is then able to externalize itself onto the outer world. Without being seen, Wetiko feeds this unconscious identity. It wants it to grow bigger and begins to project itself out onto other people. It spots an external person that is emotionally unavailable and distorts our perception into making us believe that we desire this specific person. And as planned, when this person does not show us the love we desperately crave, it reinforces our unloved subconscious identity. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that continues to fuel Wetiko's existence. But it is only through this continuation of suffering that we can become aware of this unconscious identity. The unlovable identity wants to be reintegrated, and it will create as much disruption in our lives as necessary just for its very existence to be noticed by our conscious mind. As Jung puts it, quote, "The unconscious works sometimes with most amazing cunning, arranging certain fatal situations, fatal experiences which make people wake up." End quote. Thus, our yearning was not for the emotionally unavailable love obsession. This person was simply a channel for our real desire to be comprehended, the desire for our wounded self to finally be understood and heard. Through this inner alchemy, the Wetiko that destroys us is simultaneously the Wetiko that births our illumination. Now, most people who attempt to manifest a specific person are not in overtly abusive relationships, and for some people, the source of their obsession cannot be pinned on such an obvious origin as childhood trauma. Many cases involve the longing for a person who is just barely in communication with them, or who is not even aware of the obsessor's existence. For some people, the feelings of obsession have seemingly arisen out of nowhere, almost like an alien love bite. The pining is only prolonged by the repeated affirmation that this person will someday conform to their idealized picture. Such cases may require a more intricate self-reflection. The approach often touted in Neville-centric communities is to simply ignore what has happened in the outer world and act as if this person already loves you. And when this is said in response to a perceived abandonment from a specific person, it disallows for proper healing and comprehension to take place. Instead, this sentiment only intensifies the intrusive thoughts that afflict a limerent mind. Part 2.1 on our limerent, God-given desires. Often, limerence is fueled by our innate desire for excess, or wanting what we cannot have. How many times have you believed with all your heart that a particular person or object would bring you ultimate happiness, and when you finally attained this desire, you realized it didn't matter to you at all? According to Paul Levy, the Native Americans thought of excess as another word for evil. It is in our nature to believe that something external can bring us happiness. And of course, without thinking dualistically, this may be true in certain instances. But like an addict, we are often simply chasing the endocrine rush that satisfies this desire for excess. This is why its accumulation can only pacify us for so long. We continue to believe that these external sources bring us happiness while ignoring their transient, cosmetic flavor, as if under a collective spell. this enslavement continues to drive our search for the insatiable supply of more in order to fulfill a projection of Wetiko that was never really real to begin with. Would the people in these specific person communities say that an addict's desire for drugs was given to them by God and that we should therefore encourage its conscious manifestation? The discrepancy between what should and should not be manifested demonstrates a cognitive dissonance within these communities. Just because God gave the desire does not mean it was given with the sole intention to be consciously manifested. This is a one-dimensional way of understanding the multifaceted mechanism that brings forth our desires, and is why so much anguish ensues when a particular desire does not manifest as we intend. Instead, it would be more appropriate to think of the drug addict's desire as a means for God to bring awareness to the disintegrated identity the user tries to escape from. Sometimes, an addict has to lose their job, their family, their health, before they can become aware that this very desire has caused their destruction. And by finally confronting this darkness, they can experience true freedom. Just like shining a light in a dark room, the shadows dissipate through the torch of the conscious mind. Part 3. How Wetiko infiltrates specific person communities. You only need to take one glance at the online specific person forums to see the amount of suffering that consumes it. While many of the upvoted posts are filled with success stories that unfolded under the most unlikely of circumstances, it doesn't take long to scroll back to its ugly reality. If you have the eyes to see it, you will find too many stories that do not align with the dominant narrative that anything is possible. Some of these people have been waiting for their SP for many months, for others, years. In fact, at one point, I had posted my own success story, unrelated to romance. Within that same day, 2 people messaged me for advice about specific people they had both been manifesting for over 3 years. I am by no means discounting the success that some people have had when manifesting a specific person. I also believe it can be possible to manifest a specific person if that person has a role to play in your life path. However, it is clear that for every one of these success stories, hundreds of people are in states of sorrow, unable to manifest their love obsession regardless of any techniques they try. And while I know these success stories are of good intent and that they have done some good for the collective, I also believe that they ultimately serve Wetiko's agenda to keep people tied to this ever-elusive goal. There are certain phrases Wetiko has appropriated from Goddard's teachings that keep people bound to this narrative. People failing to manifest their love obsession are told, you just have to keep persisting, you need to ignore the 3D, just live in the end. This keeps them in an emotionally addictive state of cat and mouse, the cycle of which becomes eerily predictable. They don't see any movement from their SP, they feel devastated. Then they vent their frustrations to their online community. They get regurgitated key phrases back, and then they feel high again with the delusion that their SP will soon conform. There is a collective psychosis that ensnares these communities. People often berate, disparage, or remove others that do so much as even question the narrative. They tell themselves, well, this person must have been reacting to their 3D a bit too much, so of course they can't manifest anything. Whatever the case may be, a default excuse is always ready. This is why many of these groups require heavy moderation. Like putting a rug over a crack from an earthquake, the psychosis of this spell must be safeguarded at all costs. Instead of recognizing the common denominator within these stories, believers maintain their state of ignorance by simply dismissing any and all evidence that the law is not infallible, even if this evidence is right under their noses. For some people that have invested so much into this delusion, it is simply too painful to think that, just maybe, the person unable to influence their specific person had done everything right. Part 3.1. The sunk cost fallacy of the appointed hour. This collective state of anguish is further reified by the notion of the appointed hour. And while it is true that manifestations will ripen in their own time, this leads many people that are manifesting a specific person to adopt a sunk cost fallacy. After a certain period of time elapses with no results, people are more hesitant to give up their manifestation for fear of having wasted the amount of time that was already spent on its pursuit. It is as if waiting even longer for this manifestation to ripen will somehow be more beneficial than accepting defeat, even if giving up would vastly improve their quality of life. Often, people in these communities will warn others not to put their lives on hold for their specific person. They encourage others to still date other people and to act as if their manifestation is like a package that will be delivered at any moment. But for many people, it is near impossible to detangle themselves from their love obsession. The limerent afflicted mind is incapable of simply letting that person go. Love is one of the most painful yet addictive emotions that can befall someone. And when a person believes that the lack of love from a specific person is the source of their misery, it becomes difficult to function. It consumes them, and it becomes all they can think about. The thought of a different person even attempting to fill this void makes them internally convulse. There was one person that I had become closely acquainted with. We bonded over our mutual desire to manifest a specific person. In her case, the man she wanted to be with loved her back. They functionally acted as if they were already in a relationship. The issue was that this man was being coerced into an arranged marriage. For 2 long years, he had begged his family to let him marry my friend, but the family remained staunch in their decision. My friend had known about this arranged marriage since her early encounters with this man. This would become the ultimate point of contention throughout their 2-year relationship. She told me that she'd have never engaged with him had she not known about these Neville-centric communities. But instead, she chose to spend the next 2 years of her life attempting to change her lover's fate. Throughout these 2 years, I watched her experience the tumultuous ride that ensues when attempting to influence a love obsession. Like me, she would go through periods of emotional highs during moments of inspiration, which were shortly followed by immense lows that crashed twice as hard. Despite everything she heard from Goddard's teachings and his associated communities, she continued to feel powerless in the situation. Every other manifestation she attempted would appear effortlessly in her reality, so how could this one be so different? The topic of moving on would occasionally be brought up, and every time, it would all boil down to the sunk cost fallacy. If she had already spent 2 years of her life trying to manifest this man, then to give up now, she felt, would be as if she had wasted those 2 years of her life. But this is not the case. Almost all types of relationships have an expiration date, and to think that any amount of time spent with someone is a waste because it isn't permanent is how Wetiko keeps us bound to an identity that no longer serves us. Whether you see it or not, all relationships serve a purpose. Even connections founded on unrequited love continuously shape us into the people we are supposed to become. My friend eventually conceded her pursuit of this man. Shortly after, she became happily married to someone else. Even though the thought of being with another man had previously made her physically sick, she now says she wouldn't have it any other way. This conviction that our love obsession is the only person that could ever make us happy is merely Wetiko desperately trying to continue its existence through our self-inflicted suffering. But this is only a false identity. This feeling of the one, the thought that we couldn't possibly move on from a person, is not an objective feeling, but rather it is an intangible externalization of our fears and codependency. And with the right tools, this feeling can become the catalyst for our own salvation. Part 4. Signs, Synchronicities, and the Importance of Discernment. There was one incident I had with my former love obsession that required my utmost discernment. Without such a toolkit, I could have easily been led astray from my path to a Wetiko-free life. It had been 9 months since I last saw or heard from my love obsession, and for those 9 long months, I had allowed the Wetiko parasite to wreak havoc on my psyche. The endless taunts around my obsession had taken up almost all space in my mind. I felt like I had fallen victim to my own consciousness, trapped by these false identities that continued to fester whether I ignored them or engaged them, as if they had taken a life of their own. One day, I was staring mindlessly at my screen at work, as I usually do, when I had the sudden epiphany to perform a cord-cutting ritual on my love obsession. I wasn't fully convinced that it would work. It was simply a desperate attempt to try anything and everything to free myself of his grasp. I felt a sudden burst of empowerment from this idea and decided that I would perform this as soon as I arrived back home. My workday was finally over. The bus arrived at my designated stop, and all that was left was a 10-minute walk back to my house, the same unsuspecting route that I'd always take. It was a late evening, and there were hardly any cars on the road. The air felt serene. I quickly found myself getting lost in my own thoughts before being jolted by the honk of a car horn from right behind me. Nothing had happened on the road that warranted the need to honk, so I brushed it off and continued down the footpath. But as the car drove past me, I couldn't help but notice that it looked strikingly familiar. My eyes gazed through the back window of the vehicle. I could distinctly see the back of his head and the same work uniform he always wore. I then looked up and could see most of his face staring back at me through the rearview mirror. We shared a moment of eye contact, and as if realizing that he was now too far from me to do anything else, he proceeded to wave at me before driving away as quickly as he came. Whether or not it was really him, or just a doppelganger that had been placed within my field to elicit the same response, I knew I had to process this experience with discernment. Why did we have this encounter on the same day that I was going to cut cords with him? And why was this the first time I'd ever seen him in public, when he doesn't live or work near my house, and I otherwise spend most of my time in places that he normally frequents? If I hadn't known any better, I would interpret this event as a sign that he was about to manifest back into my life. Or maybe that it was a last-ditch effort by my higher self to convince me not to proceed with the ritual. But you must consider all the facts at hand before you can derive such a meaning. If it were truly in our life paths to be back in each other's lives, then a cord-cutting ceremony would not stop that from happening. In fact, mere days after I performed the ritual, the cords reattached themselves because I hadn't addressed the root of the problem. Therefore, the idea that this performance would be so catastrophic that even my higher self had to orchestrate such an ambiguous, fleeting event was unlikely. Likewise, if this was a sign that we would eventually be in union, then why weren't we instead put in a situation which would have facilitated such an event, one that would allow for proper communication? Since this encounter occurred, no such meeting has taken place. Now, I do not discount that anything could happen in my future life path. However, I also believe that any signs that target your weak spots, that appeal to loneliness or limerence, do not necessarily stem from a benevolent source. At least in my current view, I believe this experience was the manifestation of my own unconscious blind spots. My obsessive identities insisted on toying with my psyche, and thus the world of Caesar had to perpetuate this inner drama onto the external world. If I had assumed this synchronicity was a precursor to us getting back together, I would perpetuate a feedback loop of false hope. And because our encounter did not lead to any tangible outcome, this false hope would have eventually led to a continuation of the yearning attitudes that orchestrated my inner world. This would ultimately serve as a self-fulfilling prophecy that I would have only come so close to disrupting. Having said that, I do not wish to encourage paranoia. It would be equally incorrect to assume that all synchronicities are Wetiko manufactured for nefarious purposes. I believe that divinely assisted synchronicities can occur, which can bring about great, intelligent guidance. The key is to lay out all the objective facts surrounding your circumstance and perhaps wait for more evidence that further confirms your situation. The totality of evidence should be considered before making any sound judgment on a synchronicity. If you ever see the name of your love obsession on a number plate and then immediately see the numbers 444, it could mean anything. It could be a sign that this person will be reuniting with you, or it could just as easily be the result of a negative, unconscious feedback loop being externalized on the screen of space. Without discernment, trying to understand the meaning of these syncs is like navigating the seas without a map. The tiniest of waves can set you off course. Part 5. Merging conscious manifestation with future probabilities. Unlike most Neville-centric people, I have come to believe that people have free will. However, I also understand that our own baseline perceptions of the world play a large part in how people appear in our lives. Have you noticed that the same situation can amuse one person while another gets frustrated? In fact, rarely will one person have the same reaction to an event as someone else. Think of all the situations in your life that haven't gone your way. Is there a default pattern with which you react? Are you quick to anger or worry? Or do you look at situations with acceptance, reason, or peace? Furthermore, what are your thoughts and daydreams like when you are on autopilot? Is there an ongoing theme? If our baseline emotion is anger, we will be quick to project such feelings onto both people and the external world. As a result, it doesn't take much for a person or circumstance to frustrate us. And when these people or events provoke our inner rage, it confirms our default worldview back to us, thus deepening the feedback loop. But when we take notice of these baseline perceptions and work to comprehend them, we get a sense of the clearer picture, one that is not so harmfully distorted by our own personal narrative. If we can see life through a greater lens of love and compassion, then our outer world, including other people, will mirror that sentiment back to us. Whether this change in baseline beliefs can influence the behavior of another person is dependent on why that person initially showed up in your reality. If you have been operating from a state of insecurity for a long time, then it is possible that a certain person came into your life purely to play the fulfillment of that role. In this case, a change of baseline perception will likely remove this person from your life, and any desires you may have had for them will be neutralized. But if it is merely this person's actions that you have inaccurately perceived to be of an unlovable nature, then by changing your baseline perceptions, you will begin to see this person in a more uplifting light. This simple shift in perspective can be the start of a renewed, positive connection with this person. You may have noticed that I haven't entirely disregarded the idea of conscious manifestation directed towards a specific person. What if your yearning is genuinely coming from a soul-centered desire and not of the ego? And what if this person has been divinely selected to play a role in your life? Part 5.1. The Law of Divine Selection. I believe Florence Scovel Shinn was most correct in her approach to conscious creation. In her teachings, she preaches that whatever is yours by divine right, and that your divine selection will reveal itself in its divine time. If a specific person is your divine selection, then it does not matter what happens in the outer world. You can never lose this person. And because time is not linear, they are always with you. Often, they just haven't been brought to your awareness yet. This is why Shinn approaches a specific person manifestation with a this or better mentality. Most often, the people we are longing for are not our divine selection, and there is somebody else that the universe is waiting to gift us. somebody that is divinely fit to fulfill our soul-centered desires rather than our egoic or ego-driven desires. Could this perhaps be why Goddard hadn't thought to manifest a fruitful marriage with his first wife? We can see this sentiment play out across all areas of our lives. We may come across a specific job listing and believe with all our heads that this job was meant for us. We do all the conscious manifestation techniques we know of to externalize a reality in which the job is ours, but the saga displeasingly ends with a rejection letter. Often, this is because the job was not ours by divine right. By speaking the word, we can find the divinely selected career that satisfies us more than what we originally thought was possible. We are all on a particular life path, and we also have a set of immediate future probabilities that can be manipulated like a Choose Your Own Adventure series. It's just a matter of speaking one of these probabilities into reality and allowing it to ripen when the time is right. Part 5.2. The inconsistent nature of everyone as you pushed out. When I first discovered the concept of everyone as you pushed out, I decided to put it to test before coming to any conclusions. I wrote a list of people that I intended would contact me in some way. These were people who I hadn't spoken to in many months or years, and whom I had little to no resistance towards. In other words, I wouldn't be bothered one way or the other if they actually reached out. At the time of recording, this list is about 2.5 years old. Still, about 70% of my test subjects haven't yet contacted me, but the other 30% have, some of whom did so in astonishing ways. Let's discuss these two categories further. Category 1. The 70% of people on my list that did not manifest as I intended. What I found interesting was that some of the people on my list did manifest in my outer world, just not in a way that would allow our life paths to intermingle. I'll share one of several examples in which this played out. I actively avoid watching the news, but I just so happened to walk by my roommate's TV while it was on. Footage of a protest was being shown, and I saw somebody in the crowd that looked exactly like one of the people I had on my list. A few seconds later, the news reporter said that the protest took place in this person's city of residence. This city is relatively small, with a population less than 350,000, so the likelihood that it really was this person is not entirely improbable. I believe that because I was no longer part of this particular person's immediate field of probabilities, I could not externalize myself within his reality. But because I consciously intended for him to appear in my reality, he did just that, or at least an archetypal version of himself did. This encounter was our Nash equilibrium, the closest way our outer worlds could possibly interact without impacting the other person's immediate life path. One other instance of such a phenomenon comes to mind. Several years ago, I had a friend that intended to win the Powerball. Within that same week, it was announced that somebody in her city of a population less than 50,000 had been selected to win. But unfortunately, the winning ticket was not hers, and she was unable to externalize such a fate within her immediate timeline. This suggests that there may be some merit to the idea that specific people can be manifested in our reality to a certain extent. But many people within these Neville-centric communities will view these events as a sign of movement, of proof that their actual desire for two-way contact is beginning to externalize in the outer world. As previously discussed, it is essential to look at all signs with discernment and not just assign them with an all-encompassing, unambiguous meaning. In my case, I'd written this list over 2.5 years ago and have not had any two-way communication with said person, which was my primary intention. Of course, it is possible that such communication could still manifest, but with the benefit of hindsight, it is safe to say we did not have a role to play in each other's immediate life paths, and thus the externalization of my command could not occur at that point in time. Category 2, the 30% of people on my list that did manifest as intended. Concerning this group of people, I believe we both had future probabilities within our immediate timelines that would allow for two-way communication to occur. Whether these probabilities would have prevailed regardless of my conscious intention is unfalsifiable. However, with all the unknowns surrounding the quantum field, I don't believe it is far-fetched to postulate that the weight of mere will can be enough to tip the scales for whichever prevailing narrative is brought forth. Every person that got back in contact with me had done so in relatively short periods of time. I don't think any of these manifestations took longer than 5 weeks to actualize. Despite my initial doubt, there was one event that served as my own degree of personal proof regarding the everyone as you pushed out doctrine. There was one person on my list that hadn't spoken to me in almost a year, lived halfway across the world, didn't know my last name, and shared no mutual friends. The only way we stayed in contact was through old phone numbers and social media, both of which I had to deactivate. I knew the odds of him somehow finding a way to contact me was almost non-existent. To make matters worse, I did not believe he had any desire to get back in contact with me. Well, after a month of sparing affirmations and mental diet whenever I remembered, he reached out to me in a nearly impossible way. This leads me to believe that circumstances truly don't matter, but only if the intended manifestation is within your set of future probabilities. This gives further credence to Florence Scovel Shinn's notion that what is divinely yours will always be yours, no matter the circumstances. If this is the case, if it really is meant to be, then the contents of your manifestation will have no choice but to externalize in the outer world, even if its probability seems akin to a lottery win. Part 6. The Antidote to the Mind Virus. Optimizing your potential to become ungovernable. Part 6.1. Overcoming thought parasites. Manifestation communities will often promote conscious affirmations as a technique to rewire our subconscious beliefs. But this deliberate concentration will likely make up less than 1% of our total thoughts. But what about the other 99% of thoughts that occur when our brain is on autopilot and not actively sustaining attention to a particular idea or task? This state, otherwise known as the alpha wave state, occurs when we are in an idle, relaxed mode of consciousness that does not require much concentration. In this state, it becomes easy to get lost in daydreams and unconscious thoughts, which can provide a breeding ground for any emotional triggers to flood the mind. While in this brainwave, the subtlest of external or internal motions can trigger sudden intrusive thoughts. Seemingly innocuous daydreams about a love obsession can surface, and without discipline, can compound into compulsive retellings of past scenarios that evoked hurt and agony. And while these daydreams can act as an internal GPS that navigates us to our unhealed traumas, the incorrect handling of this information may only serve as a feedback loop to elicit further grief. You have 2 options when presented with an emotional trigger. One option is to prolong its associated pain, and the other is to learn from and neutralize it. Most people choose to inadvertently prolong their suffering. This is done by actively entertaining the emotional trigger. Either consciously or unconsciously, the person continues to engage with the story. They add scenarios that never took place or exacerbate the existing painful memories. And although the emotional response is disturbing, the person tells themselves that they won't stop until they have fully relished in the distressing emotions. Like masochism, the pain is oddly addictive, and once you start, you cannot stop. This is often the result of the Neville-centric doctrine that you must ignore everything that has happened in the outer world. By constantly suppressing these negative emotions, the subconscious tries to resurface the story until it can finally be expressed and neutralized. It tries to retell itself through the path of least resistance, when your mind is relaxed and unsuspecting. Therefore, when these recurring thought forms arise, the key is not to repress them. In fact, by fully expressing the pain, you are able to neutralize it. It is actually recommended that you continuously replay the objective events until the emotional response becomes non-existent. Key word here being the objective events. The trouble is only when you fall into a rabbit hole of prescribing inaccurate meanings to the event. For example, thinking of a situation where a specific person rejected you and taking that to mean you are inherently unworthy of love. You can avoid this fate by looking at the situation from an observer's point of view. In most cases, a person's words or deeds cannot objectively hurt your being. It only hurts because the event must first be processed through the eyes of the ego, which often has the temperament of a child. By simply observing the objective actions for what they are, you can try to understand them through a higher level of consciousness. For instance, how would someone view the situation if they were operating from a baseline state of amusement? If their baseline state was that of a forgiving nature, how would their perceptions of the situation change? If you remain disturbed by the incident, there is still a lesson to be learnt. Ask yourself, what am I being taught? Do I have a repressed identity at work? The quicker we can answer this, the better. We do not have to hit rock bottom to learn our intended lessons. Another suggestion is to view the hurt you feel with love and forgiveness. As discussed previously, this persistent injury is merely a disintegrated part of yourself that has been carrying this pain for a long time. It is your internal wounded child that has been shunned and exiled when all it needs is to be heard. Forgive this pain. Speak to it. Say that you love it and that you apologize for snuffing its voice. The more you work to comprehend this pain, the better prepared you will be to face any other troubling inner story that comes to light. Instead of suppressing it, you will transform it. If you allow the narrative to heal you, you will have gratitude for the perpetrator that shone the light on these hidden aspects of yourself. Part 6.2. Becoming the Artist. Paul Levy's suggestion for overcoming Wetiko is to take on the archetype of the artist. This isn't referring to the typical paint and canvas artist, although that can be one avenue for certain people. He instead refers to a person who explores their unconscious identities through creative means. This creative expression can be external, such as through music, literature, cinema, or it can be internal, such as through inner alchemy and meditation. The beauty of meditation in this context is that it does not have to require hours of controlled thought. It is simply the act of self-reflection when confronted with distressing inner narratives. Quote, "We are all creative, interdimensional, visionary artists and dreamers whose canvas is life itself." End quote. The expression of art gives you a higher awareness and avenue with which to articulate and understand the very treachery that is occurring within your lower awareness. Only operating from lower awareness allows Wetiko to take control of your thoughts and desires, but to only acknowledge higher awareness draws ignorance to the Wetiko that silently works in the background. The artistic process allows for the merging of both polarities to occur, creating for you the middle path of awakening. The process of artistic expression allows you to critically examine the shadow aspects of yourself. The creative blocks or impasses you may experience during this undertaking shine a light on any unconscious blind spots you may be operating under, which provides a bridge for your higher awareness to bring about deep insight. A worthy comparison may be the difference between active versus passive learning. Although passive learning is still a helpful approach, it becomes easy to simply absorb any relevant information without applying the core messages to your life. By creating art, you are essentially teaching yourself about your own psyche, which represents the highest form of learning. This practice brings about subtle but profound clarities that you wouldn't even realize you were missing if only a passive approach were taken. If you express this art to the external world, you also gift others the self-awareness of their own inner Wetiko. If the art is embodied in the internal self, then you help the collective unconscious heal from their enwrapped mass psychosis. the medicine of art transcends all dimensions. Part 6.3. Set fire to the shadows. Carl Jung is perhaps the most noteworthy psychologist regarding the unconscious mind, and due to his heavy influence on Paul Levy's work, it would be unfair to go without his mention. While Jung's work is too impressive to go over in one recording, I do wish to direct you to one part of his theory that may be of relevance. That is, the archetype that exists within every man and woman, the anima and animus. The anima is the feminine archetype that resides within every male, and the animus is the masculine archetype residing in every female. This aspect of ourselves is often not properly expressed due to the societal pressures to strictly play out the roles of our assigned gender. As a result, we repress these aspects, and thus we project them onto members of the opposite sex. This anima or animus projection causes us to falsely see our romantic interests as an idealized archetype made up of the masculine or feminine complexes that reside in our unconscious. The anima and animus play out slightly differently from each other, so I would encourage further research on these topics if you feel so compelled. When integrating the anima or animus archetype, a worthy pursuit is to first acknowledge its existence. Nobody on the planet is immune from the treacherous workings of the unconscious. Once accepted, we need to sustain an unyielding awareness of all situations in which the anima or animus has the potential to be projected. Think to yourself, do you have a type when it comes to your attracted sex? What are the recurring traits and themes that you tend to have an extreme enticement towards? We may use active imagination as a means to gain further clarity on these questions. You may notice that you have been projecting these idealized traits onto a specific person. If this is the case, then the love that you feel for them is merely your response to the distorted lens from which you are viewing this person. This may be especially true in cases of limerence, which explains why we can have intense yearnings for a person we hardly know. Now suppose we begin to recognize that these projections are not real, and that our limerence for a specific person is, in most cases, not coming from an objective nor unconditional realization of their true nature. In this case, we can begin the process of de-idealization. Next, you can work to reintegrate these traits within yourself. For a woman, these desired traits are likely what you would traditionally consider masculine, and vice versa for a male. A woman may be longing for a man that is a good problem solver. In this case, the woman should cultivate her own problem-solving skills. This may include reading detective novels or learning how to play chess. You can be as creative as you wish when exploring these avenues. When discussing the reintegration of the unconscious, Jungian analyst Dal Sharp once said, quote, "A long process of negotiation is unavoidable," end quote. Recognize the triggers with which this archetype is likely to be projected, and then realize how you can personally transmute it before it takes dominance over your conscious mind. In doing this, you will be better prepared for when you next have to shove aside your idealized projections of a person and reflect on what your true thoughts and feelings are. Part 6.4. Bringing life to your soul-centered desires. There must be a middle ground between the deep inner mastery that comes from shadow work and the techniques used for conscious creation. Focusing only on consciously manifesting the outer world will lead to brief periods of empowerment, followed by persistent crashes when the deep-rooted aspects from the inner world try to resurface. Likewise, to only focus on the deep-rooted elements of the shadow will keep you tied to the past. This will not provide you with the agency to shape your future destination. Therefore, I still encourage the manifestation techniques provided by teachers such as Neville Goddard and Florence Scovel Shinn, just as I would encourage an examination of your inner psyche as inspired by Carl Jung and Paul Levy. According to Shinn, conscious creation should be directed towards the root of a desire. For instance, one should realize their desire for a romantic relationship without discriminating the means or outcome that fulfills it. To try and influence a specific outcome, where specific people must forego their own life paths to satisfy the intent, is not viable. Quote, each day he must live according to the divine plan or have unhappy reactions. End quote. In her book, Your Word is Your Wand, Shin provided a list of affirmations for manifesting divine love. Another practice that Shin recommends is to cultivate unconditional love and forgiveness, particularly for those who have hurt you. By operating from these baseline perceptions, we can neutralize the resentments that linger in the unconscious mind. This allows us to break the subconscious feedback loops that repeatedly project these resentments onto the external world and untie the characters in our lives that were merely cast to fulfill such burdensome identities. In The Game of Life and How to Play It, Shin spoke of a woman in deep distress. This woman's lover had betrayed her, and her love for this man had now turned to bitter resentment. Shin replied to this woman, quote, "You are not loving that man, you are hating him. You can never receive what you have never given. Give a perfect love, and you will receive a perfect love. Perfect yourself on this man. Give him a perfect, unselfish love, demanding nothing in return. Do not criticize or condemn, and bless him wherever he is. When you send out real love will return to you, either from this man or his equivalent. For if this man is not the divine selection, you will not want him. As you are one with God, you are one with the love which belongs to you by divine right." End quote. In order to experience unconditional love, we first have to forgive. By forgiving others, we release them from the bond of playing their unfavorable role in our lives. Such people will then be free to do whatever is next in their immediate life paths, whether that is to remain in our lives or to make their exit for the betterment of both parties. Quote, "Besides, all the angels in heaven will testify that real love in marriage comes from the Lord." End quote. Those familiar with the visionary Emanuel Swedenborg's work will know that he shared his spiritual insights of soulmates, or divine selections, at length. In his work, he notes that through divine providence, the Lord will provide for you the person with whom you share a perfect soul connection, whereby a mutual, everlasting love will form. In this case, we will all find our divine counterparts, whether that happens on earth or in the afterlife. You will never lose this person, and it is through your divine selection that you will learn to cultivate a true unconditional love for every being, including the transmutation of limerence for another into painless, altruistic love. Swedenborg says we do not have to wait to meet our divine selection before practicing unconditional love. We can embody such conduct now by adopting practices of selflessness and charity in all that we do. If we continue to give the love that we wish to receive, we start to appreciate the mere experience of being love, demanding nothing from another in return. Unconditional love is our most authentic nature, and there is no limit to the amount of love we can share for one another. It is the type of love that we will all be acquainted with. If not here, then in the higher dimensions. This love will transcend the painful limerence that binds us to others in the third dimension and allow us to recognize ourselves for who we truly are, interconnected beings cast as earthly actors in each other's divine theatre.